So these are my hidden depth socks. These are a stranded colorwork sock pattern with a little goldfish, beta fish, seahorse, and a little anglerfish duplicate stitch down here at the bottom. She seems to be the star of the show for a lot of people, but the goldfish are my favorite. And I've had a couple people now in the comments saying either like, oh, I've never knit socks before, but I want to try to knit these, or like, these are the socks that are like the first socks that have ever inspired me to want to knit socks, which is like the highest praise you could give me. Keep it coming, guys. Like, let me be a sock knitting evangelist to get other people in this sock knitting cult. But these socks the pattern is a pattern, it's not a tutorial, and I would say it's like advanced beginner, it's relatively beginner friendly, but it's not like a step-by-step tutorial for someone who's never knit socks or colorwork before. And so I designed this pattern with the intention of maybe someone who's knit a sock and knit a colorwork project, and this is the first colorwork sock, and that would absolutely be perfectly fine. If you've knit colorwork socks before, goes without saying, these are going to be easy as pie. But if you've knit colorwork and you've knit socks, just never colorwork socks, these are a great option. Also, if you've knit anything small circumference like a sleeve or a glove and you've knit colorwork, again, perfectly fine. If you've knit a sock before, but you've never knit colorwork, I actually think that this is a great place to start. Colorwork socks are a little bit more challenging than colorwork outside of socks because it's really essential that it can stretch enough to get over your heel. And I don't think that is as much of a tension issue as it is just knowing that you need to either size up your needles or go up a stitch count, which I explain in the pattern. However, if you've never knit colorwork and you also don't really know how to knit colorwork, I would recommend you watch a tutorial on colorwork in general and maybe colorwork on socks. My favorite colorwork in general tutorial is Norman Nimble Needles. I think it's just one tutorial where he goes through all the different methods that you can use for holding and tensioning multiple strands of yarn. I'm personally a continental knitter who tensions my yarn all on my left hand, and I just use a knitting thimble to keep the strands separate. The video I'm specifically referring to is How to Knit Fair Isles for Beginners, and then there's some more information in the title. And he goes over all the different ways of like knitting stranded by dropping each color as you're using it and not using it, by holding the color in each hand, or by having them over one finger with or without a knitting thimble. He goes over all the different methods so you can kind of figure out which one you would like, and then he also just goes into lots of tips and tricks for knitting stranded colorwork better. And then in terms of like sock specific information, Summer Lee has a really helpful colorwork sock knitting video, and Stone Knits has a bunch of really helpful colorwork sock knitting shorts. On the flip side, if you've knit colorwork before but you've just never knit socks, I think that you maybe have a little bit less work to do than the Needing to Learn Colorwork group, because I would just say watch some videos on the different short circumference methods and choose which one appeals to you and learn how to do it. The hardest part of knitting socks, especially with the short row heel, because if not the like learning curve of the heel flap and gusset, is just learning how to knit small circumference. Me personally, when I'm knitting colorwork socks, I always knit the cuff on magic loop, and then I switch to 9-inch circulars for the colorwork, and then I do the heel. I'll hold to the first half of my stitches, the instep, on the 9-inch circular, and I'll use 2 DPNs for the heel, and I'll switch to if I'm knitting like these ones where there's no colorwork on the foot, I'll switch to magic loop, but if there's colorwork all the way down, I'll switch back to my 9-inch circulars, and then I do the toe on magic loop. But actually, you can do all of this except the toe on 9-inch circulars if that's your preferred method. You can do a short row heel on 9-inch circulars. I've done it before. I don't like to do it when I have interchangeables because sometimes they come undone with all the like tension of the short row heel for some reason, but it is possible. And I think that 9-inch circulars result in the cleanest colorwork tension, but some people don't like how they feel in their hands, and then you might need to look up some tips and tricks for ways to keep your colorwork looking neat with the different short circumference methods. And if you ever have questions or need support to knit any of my patterns, this one or any subsequent patterns that come out, you can always DM me wherever you can find me. I'm here, I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube, I'm on Ravelry. You can also comment on relevant videos, though sometimes for longer questions it can get kind of messy to explain. You can also, if you want to hear from someone other than me, because I know I'm a little rambly, I'm not always the clearest, you can always go to your local yarn store. They're usually pretty glad to help out, especially if their questions are about yarn. They will gladly suggest some things, but are often just helpful in general and willing to be resources for your knitting questions. And I find Reddit very, very helpful. The r/sock-knitting Reddit, it might still be me answering the questions because I like to scroll through sometimes and find where I can be helpful. So, brief reminder, the beta for these is out for another 5 days? Until Tuesday, the beta will be open, and then the pattern will release for real, but you have to pay money for it starting on June 2nd.